Hello, and welcome to another episode of Thoroughly Thriving, where we're putting human back in human capital solutions. On today's episode, we're going to hear from an industry leader where they're sharing their thoughts, feedback, and perspective on what's happening in today's world of work. Well, let's stay tuned and perk our ears up for another exciting episode.
Hey, Thoroughly Thriving audience. Welcome to another wonderful episode. We are so excited for today's guest. Darren, how are you feeling today?
So I'm feeling great. I got my flower shirt on. It's going to be a great episode, a great day. I think things are going to be popping and blooming today.
I love it. I love it. Well, hey, let's get right to it today because today's guest, we are both very, very excited to have with us. We are so excited to have Marcus Littman joining us today. You know, he's an executive who has deep expertise in drug safety, signal detection, all things pharmacovigilance, especially in the fast-moving world of targeted immunotherapies. He's currently the vice president of drug safety at Iovance Biotherapeutics, and he's spent over the last 20 years working at the intersection of clinical development, regulatory strategy, safety science, and how can they best all work together. He's led global safety teams. He's built systems from the ground up and helped companies navigate a lot of complex challenges as the environment keeps moving around a little bit. He's always on the forefront of what's going to be the most innovative and effective methodologies moving forward. He's thoughtful and experienced, and man, we're so excited to have him as a true leader in this industry and in this space. Marcus, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Darren. A lot to live up to. Great introduction, but I'll try my best to live up to the expectations.
Don't worry. Every guest that's on here, I talk about all the time too. Even when Darren introduces me for things, I'm like, "Well, you just talk to me at the mirror in the morning before I like head out into work or into my world." Like, man, I need somebody, bragging on me like that every day.
I'm with you. I need that daily motivation.
We all do. We all
Yeah.
do. Well, Marcus, we're really excited. I know that you and Sean have known each other for years, and when we think about who we want on the podcast, what comes to mind is someone who's truly passionate about what they're called to really do as really a key component of advancing global health. And certainly we're responsible for our portion of it here at Thorough Group. But that would be impossible if we didn't know people like yourself. And I like to always focus on someone's why. You know, what really interested them about getting into, first of all, this industry, but more importantly, specifically, the functional area that you've developed your expertise in. So, Marcus, if we could just take a step back, could you share with us and the audience what first sparked your interest in drug safety and pharmacovigilance? And in an ever dynamic and evolving world, what keeps you excited after all these years of being in the industry?
Well, this one is actually a story where that was rather serendipitous, I think. Um, to get into drug safety, I think Sean already mentioned that I've been in the industry for over 20 years. So drug safety was a fairly new sort of function in pharma companies back when I joined. It had probably been around for a few years. There weren't as many regulations, guidelines around it. But I was wrapping up my undergrad studies at university, had a major in biology, had been working, jobs at school just to pay the bills, and was getting close to graduation and was like, okay, what am I going to do to sort of get into a field that has something to do with what I'm studying. And in my quest for a real job that was not just a college job, I came across a posting for an externship for drug safety. I don't even know if they called it drug safety back then. In the school newspaper, there was an ad for an externship for those who have knowledge of medical terminology, are able to sort of analyze data, et cetera. So I was like, well, I've taken some medical classes. I think I could qualify for that. Went in for an interview with the company at that time. It was called Park Davis. It was eventually taken over by Pfizer. and found out that it was basically a drug safety operations position. So back then we had paper folders, paper source documents. There was a filing system, so you have the big manila folders with color coding on them to let you know what product it was for and what documentation is going to be included in there. So um, they had essentially had a backlog of cases that had built up over time, the non-important cases that needed to be taken care of. And they just didn't have enough people, enough time during the day to do so. So they brought in about 6 to 10 of us. Been so long, I can't really remember now, to clean up the backlog in the evening. So when everybody went home from work during the day, like 5 o'clock or so, we would come in around 6 o'clock and be in there until about 11 o'clock at night, sort of processing the backlog of cases for drug safety. And from there, my interest just sort of peaked. So went in, started doing that job. Within a month or two, the supervisors for that nighttime position told us that they were looking for full-time people, and they came to me directly to interview for the full-time position. So went ahead and took that opportunity. And then as I got into the company in the full-time position, um, just got more interested in sort of the analytical side of things. So I would notice as processing cases that there were safety physicians who were doing their work to sort of analyze the cases. So I would look at what they were doing and see how they would look at a case and determine whether or not it's related. And just decided to sort of like look into that more on my own and just sort of do it on the side on my own as I'm processing cases, just to sort of anticipate what they were doing. So that's what sparked my interest in it. What holds my interest in it was that analytical portion. So it started out operational, and then from there on, um, as I interviewed for future positions, I was looking for a way to get into something that would allow me to actually analyze the data. So I rolled into aggregate report positions. I rolled into signal detection and signal management, which is where I truly found that I enjoyed the most, was the signal detection and signal management portion of drug safety.
Yeah. Wow. What a cool I love hearing people's stories, right? There is no straight line into a lot of the work that people do that really impacts global health. And yet, you hear this background story of, well, I just saw an ad in the newspaper and decided to jump into it. Who would have known all of these years later how your career has grown and advanced, and it's been incredible. I know you mentioned signal detection. I know from the conversations we've had, that's really a passion of yours. That's something that are really excited about, and with this question, there's kind of a couple of parts to it, so forgive me for the long-winded aspect of it, but there's really, I have found an art and a science of just signal detection. And especially when you're in environments like, you've worked in where there's a large amount of data. It's not just a small patient population. There's a large amount of data involved, and clarity can often be hard to come by. How do you work through all of that? How do you view that process of really balancing the art and science of it to get clear information that you can stand on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's necessarily one way to do it, and it's going to vary from trial to trial. So, at my previous company, it was a larger company, so it did have larger trials, and a lot of those trials had control arms. So you had a direct comparison between what was going on in your study with your investigational product versus what was going on with the control arm, and you can do direct comparisons. And it is partially a numbers game. You can see that there is disproportion in one arm versus another. But then, the disproportion is not necessarily where you stop at, because there could be other explanations for that disproportionality. So that's when you have to sort of delve in, and it's still scientific, but the way you sort of tailor your argument to persuade one way or another, uh, both internally and externally, is the art portion of it, because it's about the way that you present the data. It's about the way that you sort of set it up and sort of provide a clear path. So you could have two different people who are looking at the same set of data, and you could have one person come up with a list of reactions that they think is attributable to the product, but you can have another person who is totally disparate from that. But then it comes down to the arguments that you make internally that determines what's going to go forward to regulatory agencies. But then, of course, you have the back and forth with the regulatory agencies once they've reviewed your documentation. So that is one of the sort of simpler forms when you're doing a direct comparison between a control arm and your investigational medicinal product arm. It becomes a little bit more difficult and more sort of artsy, and also looking into delving even deeper into sort of like historical data, non-clinical data, um, published articles, when you're dealing with single arm trials, which is what we practically do for most of our trials here at the company that I work for now, because then you don't have a direct comparison. So you're really just sort of looking at what's going on with your product, um, trying to think about what the mechanism of action is, and whether or not, based on that mechanism of action, you would expect these types of events that you're seeing in the patients, or if there's some alternative explanation for it. So that's how you sort of balance the two.
Yeah, got it. Marcus, I can imagine throughout your career, but probably most prevalent and relevant over the last several years. When we speak to people, when we get the opportunity to speak with people like yourself, one of the golden threads of how milestones are reached is through collaboration. And so, in your experience, um, what does great collaboration between clinical development and drug safety actually look like? So that's the first part of the question. Um, and then if we can just take a deep dive on this portion, and where does it often break down? I think that'd be important for our audience to hear that aspect as well.
Okay, great collaboration. I think this is also an area that can vary from one instance to another, because departments are set up differently at different companies. So, at the previous company, for example, a lot of the clinical side of safety was handled by the clinical development team. So what would help with the collaboration in that company was when clinical would let us know that they're seeing something that we wouldn't have necessarily gotten in drug safety. So in drug safety, when you're dealing with the clinical cases, you're really only getting the serious data in real time. You can see the non-serious data later as you do data cuts and such. But the clinical team was sort of frontline, and they were able to see the AE data, for example, the non-serious AE data, which also impacts your signal detection. So they're able to see it up front. So if they're seeing something that sort of stands out that we need to be on the lookout for, just to have that sort of conversation between clinical development and drug safety was helpful. It was also helpful to sort of collaborate on presentations that would be done for something like a drug safety monitoring board or an IDMC, because then you're looking at all the data, you're presenting it to this external body for them to assess, and then coming back and taking some actions based on that. In the current company, it's safety is doing the bulk of the safety from clinical through post-marketing. So we're able to see that non-serious AE data in real time whenever we need to, because we have access to certain systems. And then we also have the post-marketing data that's coming in. So we get to see a holistic view of the safety data to make a determination as to whether or not there's some actions that need to be proposed to take care of safety for the patients. As far as where the breakdown can occur, I think what happens, and I'm speaking more from recent experience, because we overlap a lot more with clinical development where I'm currently at, is that there are oftentimes ongoing conversations between the medical monitor and the site. So it's a matter of sort of like, when you're in the midst of those conversations, you sort of get caught up in speaking directly to the site, where there could be some safety information that comes in during those conversations. So it's just a matter of just remembering that, hey, this seems like safety information, and it needs to get over to the safety department so that they can do what they need to do with this information, and then being able to follow up to obtain any sort of extra information that we need from the sites. So that's where some of the breakdown can occur. Happy to say that the team that we work with now is pretty good at it, but it takes some time to get there sometimes if it's something that you're not used to and it's a different method from what you were doing at your previous company.
Yeah, it is interesting. We have best practices that sometimes aren't always best practiced, across organizations or the way that things are orchestrated. There's just some disconnects that don't allow you to have as much of the communication. It is amazing, as many of these podcasts as we've done, Darren, communication seems to be also a part of that golden thread that, if lost, tends to have wider ranging effects. One of the things we also like to talk about, Marcus, on the podcast with our guests is talking about legacy, talking about future. And, one of the things I love about you as a leader is that you love to give back. You love to really be, a part of the lives of others in your world. What advice would you give someone who's maybe a little bit earlier in their drug safety career? I'm not saying all the way back to newspaper article early, but maybe somebody who's working along in their career and wants to grow into a leadership role like yours. What advice would you give someone that's on their way but not quite there yet?
Yeah, so I actually recently had a conversation with somebody who was I think a Pharm D recent grad, and they had a similar question as to what advice. I think they had taken a few courses in regulatory certifications, had done a couple DIA courses on drug safety, but I think what it all boils down to is trying to figure out what you're passionate about within drug safety. Drug safety is such a vast field that there are so many different areas within drug safety that you can get involved in. If you have the medical background, of course, you can be a safety physician. If you have the analytical and scientific background, you can be someone that's considered a safety scientist or a risk management person. But you have to enjoy writing, you have to enjoy analyzing data. If you're more about, sort of process and taking things through a set process and designing something that's sort of streamlined, where you're getting the data in, taking care of it. You have the operations aspect. So for anybody getting in, I think someone initially they should sort of be exposed to each of those areas. It's difficult to do in companies as someone new is coming on board because typically you're picking someone for a particular role in a company. But that's where the onus sort of falls on that person's manager as well as that person's sort of desire and resourcefulness to sort of find out more. So what I tell people is with my story, as I mentioned earlier, like um, being in operations, I was doing the work and getting it done, but something else held my interest more. And I wanted to find out more about how you do that, right? So how do you analyze these cases? What data are you looking at to make a determination as to whether or not this case is related, that case is not related? And how do you determine when you've reached a threshold that you need to notify patients, notify prescribers, et cetera? So for anybody coming in, I think just have that sort of unbridled curiosity about other areas. Even if you're brought into a particular area in a department, you can always, or typically, I would say, you could typically talk to someone within your department that may be in a different function that may be willing to sit with you and talk you through what they do in their job function and why they find it exciting. And then, after having those conversations, you might find something else that's exciting to you and then delve deeper into that. You have different courses that are out there. I mentioned DIA. There are other agencies that put on courses that are specific to different areas of safety. So you can explore those. And then as you become more well versed in those things, then you can sort of try to see if you can make a transition either within your group or if you're exploring opportunities outside of your group to sort of get into that more deeply.
Got it. I think that's a really good roadmap and some tangible actions that folks can take that are listening. If you look over the last several years, excuse me, there is no denying the part that AI plays in development. um, and even in discovery throughout the whole process. But Marcus, curious to hear from you. What role does AI and automation have in the future of signal detection and safety data management?
So, haven't had a chance to think about this a whole lot because a lot of the use of AI, I think, will depend on budget constraints that you have within your company because everything costs money, right? AI is useful, and I think it could have a role if your company has the money to sort of pay for it. Some areas that I think that it could play a part in, if we're talking signal detection, and then here you get into some sort of like company confidentiality, proprietary information, is that if you have a data set that comes in that lays out, okay, this is what happened in arm one, this is what happened in arm two, these are your list of events. You could probably just dump that into an AI program and it could probably pick out um, the adverse events that you need to focus on based on certain criteria that you've set up. That would streamline the process. About what, 12 years ago in my previous company when I was working there, it was a very sort of like, okay, we got these listings, you got to go through this line by line by line by line and figure out, okay, where the differences lie and if it's significant or not. But to be able to plug something like that into AI, that'll eliminate all of that manual work and then leave it to the person who's responsible for it to look at those adverse events more closely and come up with arguments as to why they should be included or why they should not be included in something like the prescribing information. Um, I could also see it being used, and I think it is being used, or some companies have developed some AI to use on the operational aspects to sort of streamline that. So imagine if you get a situation where you have sites that are connected electronically to your EDC or to your database where they can enter onto a web page the information about a particular patient that comes into your database. You have a narrative template. AI automatically takes that information, plugs it into the narrative template, and then all you need is somebody to review it to make sure that it's okay. And then similarly, but probably a little bit more risky, each case has an individual comment. As AI gets more and more advanced, you could probably have that information sort of interpreted by the AI to say, okay, this was more likely caused by patient's underlying disease, this patient's concomitant medications, or probably the therapy that you gave in your study. Of course, you would have somebody who is medically savvy review that, make sure that it makes medical sense, and then tweak it where it needs to be tweaked, and then move it on. All of these things, I think, would sort of streamline the process. But as I mentioned earlier, all of it would probably cost money to do, and then you also have to deal with the parameters, work within the parameters of sort of patient confidentiality and such.
Yeah, that's a great call out on the confidentiality piece, and I love what you said about the parameter piece. Like I think we're seeing areas where AI really is making an impact, and then we're seeing areas where it's just not quite there yet. And if you're trying to streamline and review, are you adding more work to re-review what's already been reviewed? Or there's always that tension, right, as you continue to teach and build. And but I agree with you. I think there are ways down the road that we will get to be able to streamline things so that great people like yourself have the ability to analyze the most important things and the most relevant and the most frontline items that need to be first to be most effective for patients and everything else. All right, last question, Marcus. Can you believe it? You made it this far. We got all the way through the rest of our questions for you, but my last question is, I know I view you as a leader and really a thought leader in this space around what could be. Not just someone who does his work and works within the parameters of where we are today, but thinks about, what could be. If you could redesign any aspect of the current safety, we call it systems or structure or from the ground up and make it different today, what would it be?
I think it would go back to what we just talked about, this sort of automation and sort of streamlining things. I think the most impact and probably the safest impact would be to do it when you're dealing with information that's coming in that needs to go into the database that then needs to go into a narrative. Like, I think if all of that could be sort of automated so that it's sort of a seamless process, the site enters it onto a web page, it goes into your EDC system. If it's relevant for your safety system, it comes from your EDC system into your safety system. That data is all plugged in where it needs to be. And then it automatically creates the narrative that you need. And then you're able to proceed. And then, from there, um, if it's able to sort of calculate the different regions in which the case needs to be submitted, for example, I think having all of that sort of streamlined and automated would cut down a lot of the time that's associated with sort of the case processing stuff. Because in our organization, I know, and I think, and I know in my previous organization, the operations teams were the largest teams within drug safety because of all the information that's coming in from the cases and the need to process each and every case that comes in and determine where different cases have to go around the world based on the different global legislation. So if that could be sort of automated and streamlined, I think that would be on the road to sort of perfect in the organization. And then we sort of incorporate that throughout the rest of the process that's as needed. As I mentioned, it could be used for the signal detection to sort of pull out things. Of course, you're still going to need that sort of human eye to look at it to make the ultimate determination about what to do for a particular signal.
That's great, man.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I've picked up a lot more knowledge, Sean, about drug safety and pharmacovigilance. Marcus, it has been a real pleasure to learn about what keeps you excited after all these years, how you collaborate, how to leverage technology and some of the gaps that are present, but some opportunities, right, to utilize, leverage, and perhaps even optimize technology that we have in place, and potentially how you would redesign things too from the ground up. I think that's all invaluable insights. I know I can speak for Sean and I in saying that we've learned a lot. I know our audience has and will as they replayed this episode. But we really go back to our kind of our ethos, what we operate from here at Thorough Group, and we're really only able to work as one if we win as one. And so join us next time for another episode of Thoroughly Thriving. It's been a pleasure to have Marcus Littman on, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for joining us today for another great episode of Thoroughly Thriving. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to share it with those in your world. If you'd like to learn more about the Thorough Group, please go to thoroughgroup.com. And remember that we will all remain thoroughly thriving if we continue to work as one and win as one.